Good morning, gentlemen. We are back to square one. I'm going to have another small video on some interesting topic. And I think the first one we're going to talk on is about Adolf Hitler. Now, how did this idea come up? Actually, I received a lot of emails in which they wanted my assessment as to how does Hitler fare in the pantheon of world military leaders. Now, there are certain parameters, and we will follow those parameters. The first parameter is the principles of war. Now, the original principles of war were enunciated by Sun Tzu, who was a Chinese philosopher. And later on, we had Field Marshal von Clausewitz, who formulated the principles of war. And Field Marshal Montgomery added one more principle to the principles, and that was he added administration as a principle of war. So when we think of a great general, we have to discuss, evaluate him within these parameters. And the obvious question is that here is a man who literally shook Europe and the world in the 20th century. Does he have a feature or a place in the pantheon of the great soldiers of world history? Say men like Alexander the Great, Timur Lenk, Robert Clive, or for that matter, Genghis Khan? Well, let's have a look at it. See, Adolf Hitler is a unique character in the sense that he was not an officer of the German army. He had some military experience in the sense that he was a soldier in the army of the German Republic when Kaiser was the emperor and fought in the First World War. Well, there's nothing much we know about it that time except that he got injured. I think he didn't take further part in the battle. But there's another aspect which we must remember, that Hitler was pretty well read as far as military history is concerned. He had read the Schifflian plans, he had studied Frederick, he had studied von Moltke, and he had studied the philosophy of Bismarck. So he was not a novice, he was a self-educated man, but there was an overriding current over his entire thinking, and that was the racial overtones which really pulled him down. But at the start of the war, right up to 1939, I thought Hitler had played his cards very well. And his greatest victory, I will consider it the Battle of France. He studied the Schifflian plan in detail, and that plan says that the best way to beat France is to advance through the Low Countries, that is Flanders, Holland, Belgium, etc., and breach the Maginot Line. That was the line which the French had set up as a defense against the Germans. Field Marshal Schifflin had said that the German army must go through the Low Countries with the last soldier sleeve touching the English Channel. So Hitler refined that plan and put it into practice. Schifflin had also warned against a two-front war, and Hitler was very clear about that as well. He got a peace treaty signed with Russia in 1939. Von Molotov came to Berlin, and he had secured his rear, and that is the time he mounted the offensive against against France. All credit to Hitler for this victory, because he was the man who went behind the midnight oil, worked his way meticulously, and when the battle was to commence in the morning, he had reached his headquarters on the Franco-German border and was able to take first-hand account of the battle. So severe was the German offensive that France collapsed in 40 days. And this is no mean achievement in the sense that the French army at that time numbered almost 5 million. That's a huge number. But they were defeated. And that defeat was very traumatic because once you defeat the mother country, the colonies, in the French colonies, they were adrift. They didn't know what to do. Hitler at that stage was showing himself to a very adroit leader. Another very important plan which he carried out was, in the teeth of the opposition of the Royal Navy, was his invasion of Norway. It was Hitler's plan to land troops at 5 different places in Norway, flummox the Royal Navy, and take over Norway within 15 days of stupendous campaign. Another campaign where we must give credit to Hitler is the Russian campaign, Operation Barbarossa. I not go into the ethics of it, that he broke the German-Russia non-aggression pact and all that. That's part of the game. But purely from the military angle, the invasion of Russia is supposed to be the biggest invasion in world history. 3 army groups with 3 field marshals and more than 1 million men advanced across the front of 1,200 miles into Russia. What an advance it was. And perhaps if winter had not set in earlier, that's one. And secondly, if he had not been bogged down in the Balkans to try and save his friend Mussolini, who in any case didn't know what was happening both as a soldier and leader, he may have been successful. But these 2 points, the onset of an early winter and spending time in the Balkan campaign, was a detriment, and that is where Hitler faltered. The German armies ground to a halt close to Moscow. They had put Leningrad under siege, and they reached Stalingrad. Up to that point, I would say at that stage, if the war had ended, Hitler would have been one of the great soldiers of world history. But then, there's another quality in the principles of war, and that is flexibility. He was not flexible. A great general must be flexible. And that was very telling, particularly in the Battle of Stalingrad, when Field Marshal von Manstein suggested to Hitler a very simple suggestion. He said, let von Paulus break out from the encirclement of the Russians, regroup and attack back. Very sane advice, but Hitler didn't accept it. And he did something very silly, in the sense he promoted von Paulus as a field marshal with the hope that he will not surrender, because no field marshal in the German army has ever surrendered. That's what really happened. And after that, the dice was heavily loaded against Hitler. Another very interesting plan which Hitler had was in the winter of 1944, when he had massed troops in the Alps, and with almost 2,000 panzers and aircraft were all ready, and he mounted what we have come to know as the Battle of the Bulge. If Hitler had been the benefactor of God, that plan would have succeeded. Because one important ingredient of the plan was the weather. And the weather was supposed to not have cleared up, and Hitler, if it had not cleared up, there's a good chance that he would put the Americans back and gone and captured Antwerp and driven a wedge between the Anglo-American lines, war lines. But it's part of history. Hitler failed there finally. And in the sum total, if we go through what Little Hart has written in his Other Side of the Hill, and also J.F.C. Fuller, they do feel that Hitler had a spark of genius in him, no doubt about it. He had the rudiments of strategy and combat very much in his mind. He was not a novice. That was because he had personally read, as I've already told you, all the great thinkers of Europe as far as military history is concerned. He had studied the battles, the campaigns of Frederick, the battles of Bismarck. But at that moment, in 1942, he committed a blunder. This was the time when he should have really moved in and attacked England instead of attacking Russia. He had Operation Sea Lion going, which he didn't put into effect after the so-called defeat in the Battle of Britain. But I must bring out the fact there that the Battle of Britain was not such a massive victory for the RAF, in the sense that Hitler just lost heart. Goring in particular lost heart. And had Sea Lion really been pushed through, because the plan was to invade England through the English Channel at Dover and Calais, which is just 22 miles away. And at that time, America had not entered the war, and neither Russia. I don't see how England could have survived. And had he done that, he would have finished the British Empire at that time. Because his mother country had fallen, the other countries, India and Africa, and all of the colonies would have gone away. And Hitler's plan, Operation Bajador, to capture India would also have been feasible. So these are all the ifs and buts of history. But in the sum total, we can say that Hitler was a good strategist. He knew how to marshal his troops. He had knowledge of strategic warfare. He had the knowledge of the principles of war, but he didn't follow them in toto. And he allowed his judgment to be clouded by racial theories and by ego. Now, no general can fight a battle if you are going to fight an ego. If you recollect, Muhammad Ghori in his battle with Prithvi Raj lost the first battle of the Rain. But he came back for the second battle of the Rain, and that time he changed his tactics and he was ready for the massed assault of the Rajputs, and he catered for it and he won the battle. So this was a quality which was lacking in Hitler. He could not stomach an alternate plan to salvage a losing situation. In that respect, he was not a great soldier. Even Napoleon, while carrying out the retreat from Moscow, carried out in an orderly manner, and he came back, to France and re-established himself after the Grand Army had been wiped out. But Hitler, unfortunately, was not in that same class. So in the final analysis, all I will say is that Hitler certainly had elements of genius in him. He had the capacity to understand what war is, but all the same, he lacked that one glorious spark which is required to make you one of the greatest soldiers of world history. He lacked that because he couldn't think beyond the fact that war is a profession, war is art. He was thinking war is an adjunct to his political aims. His racial theories and even about of the Jews and all that. That was not the principle of war. So gentlemen, I hope you have enjoyed this short video. It gives you an assessment of what exactly Adolf Hitler is and how he will be remembered in world history. There are other aspects of Hitler which I am not really discussing here. I have discussed only the military aspects of Adolf Hitler. His command of the Wehrmacht. And one last point, Hitler had been a soldier in the German army. And he was land-oriented. He never studied the theories of Julio de Hood, and thus he didn't have an idea about what air power can achieve. One really hopes if he had studied that, his approach to so many campaigns would have been different. And at a number of places, he threw in the towel and didn't go in for similar operations, like for example in Crete, where he carried out a massive para-invasion in the teeth of opposition from the Royal Navy. But he did suffer heavy casualties, and that deterred him from anything else further. One really wishes that if he had some spark of genius, he would have done the same thing to Malta. And had he done that, it would have been all over for the British. But sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. And the fact remains that England did win the war because of the mistakes of Adolf Hitler. But it was a Pyrrhic victory, and a time came when the British army just could not control India at all. And they were so weak, so emaciated because of their battle with Hitler that they gave up and passed the Indian Independence Act and left. That's another story. Both were the main factor in that, and it has been admitted by Clement Attlee. But that's another story. Talking as far as Adolf Hitler is concerned, we can say that he knew the elements of warfare, but he was not a perfectionist. He is not a man who can be considered as one of the great generals of world history. Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been very nice talking to you. If you get the time, please share it with your friends and do subscribe. And thank you very much. Look after yourself. Jai Hind.